K9 German Shepherd attends his rescuer's funeral. What he did next will break your heart. He was more than a dog. He was a soldier, a partner, and a hero. When Officer Daniel Reed passed away unexpectedly, everyone expected a formal ceremony, folded flags, and a final goodbye. But what no one expected was what his K9 partner, Shadow, did next at the funeral. An act so powerful, so raw, it left every person in tears. This is the true story of a bond forged in loyalty and sacrifice, of a dog who refused to say goodbye, and of the miracle that unfolded when everyone thought it was too late. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more powerful stories like this one. The sky over Camden, Ohio was gray and unmoving. The morning Officer Daniel Reed was laid to rest. The town's small cemetery, usually quiet and forgotten at the edge of the woods, was suddenly filled with uniformed officers, polished badges, pressed flags, and silence so heavy it seemed to hold the clouds in place. Daniel had served as a police officer for nearly 20 years. He wasn't the kind of man who made headlines or gave speeches. He showed up. He worked overtime. He remembered birthdays. And he trained K9s, 3 in total. But only one had stayed by his side until the very end. Shadow. The black and tan German Shepherd had been Daniel's partner for the past 6 years. They'd trained together, deployed together, saved lives together. And now, Shadow stood alone beside a casket draped in an American flag, ears stiff, tail low, eyes locked on the box that held his human. The other officers had never seen him like this. Shadow had always been obedient, alert, reactive. But today, he didn't move, didn't flinch when the 21-gun salute echoed across the field, didn't blink as the folded flag was handed to Daniel's mother, didn't react when the pastor choked on his words. He just stared. Detective Maria Jensen, Daniel's closest colleague and Shadow's secondary handler, stood a few feet away, watching the dog with a pain that ran deep. She had offered to take Shadow home after the burial, to give him time to adjust, to grieve. But she didn't expect what would happen next. As the crowd began to thin and the final words were said, Shadow did something no one was prepared for. He stepped forward, one slow paw after another, through the grass, past the honor guard, until he was directly beside the casket. Then he laid down, not like a dog settling into rest, like a soldier surrendering. He placed his head gently against the wood and didn't move. The officers went still. One of the older veterans began to cry openly. Maria knelt beside him, whispering his name, trying to coax him away. But Shadow wouldn't budge. He stayed like that for hours. People came and went. The sun shifted. The groundskeeper waited. And still, Shadow lay there. It was only when the wind picked up, rustling the leaves above them, that Maria finally understood. Shadow wasn't just mourning. He was waiting for orders, waiting for Daniel to call him home. That night, Maria brought Shadow back to her place, a modest house on the outskirts of town. He didn't eat. He didn't drink. He paced from room to room like he was looking for something or someone. He stopped at Daniel's spare uniform hanging in the hallway and stood frozen for 10 minutes, as if listening for footsteps that would never come. She tried sleeping, but every time she closed her eyes, she heard his nails clicking across the floor. By morning, Maria made a decision. She couldn't treat Shadow like a normal dog, because he wasn't one. He was a K9 officer, and he had just lost the only human who'd ever given him purpose. She picked up her phone and made a call to the local precinct. "We need to do something," she said. "He's grieving. He's not eating. I think he's looking for a mission." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet voice. "You think he still wants to work?" "I think he needs to." Later that day, Shadow sat quietly in the back of Maria's cruiser as she pulled into the precinct parking lot. But what neither of them knew was that Shadow's mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. The precinct felt different without Daniel. The air was heavier, the rooms quieter. Officers avoided Shadow's gaze, unsure of how to treat him now. He wasn't just a dog. They all knew that. He was Daniel's partner, and his presence was a constant reminder of the man they'd lost. Maria brought him in through the back entrance, leading him past the rows of lockers and down into the K9 unit wing. As she walked, she kept glancing back. Shadow followed closely, but without the usual sharpness in his step. His ears weren't fully up. His tail barely moved. She stopped at Daniel's old desk. Shadow sat down. He stared at the empty chair, his chest rising and falling slowly. Maria stood beside him, heart aching. She placed a hand on his back, but he didn't lean into her like he used to with Daniel. He just waited. The captain approached, a man named Evans, mid-50s, gruff, and always careful with words. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Maria nodded. "He's not ready to retire. He needs something to hold on to." Evans looked down at the dog, then back at her. "We can't put him on full patrol, not yet, but maybe light tracking, missing persons, civilian cases." Maria's heart jumped. "That's perfect." Evans crouched down and looked Shadow in the eyes. "You ready, boy?" For a second, nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, Shadow's ears twitched. His eyes shifted, focused. That night, Maria set up Daniel's old gear in her garage. Shadow watched her unpack everything: the padded bite sleeve, the tracking harness, the scent kits. She moved slowly, speaking softly. "I don't know if you're listening," she whispered, "but I think he'd want you to keep going." She held up the harness and knelt. Shadow stepped forward, one paw, then another, and let her put it on. The call came 2 days later. A 12-year-old boy had gone missing after running away from home during a storm. The area was dense with woods, and time was ticking. Maria volunteered, and Evans reluctantly agreed, on the condition that Shadow wouldn't be pushed too hard. They drove in silence. Rain tapped gently on the windshield. Maria glanced at Shadow in the rearview mirror. He was sitting upright, eyes sharp. When they arrived, the boy's mother was sobbing on the porch. A soaked hoodie was found near the edge of the woods. That's where Maria brought Shadow. She crouched beside him, held the fabric to his nose, and whispered, "Find him." For a moment, Shadow didn't move. Then something changed. His body tensed, his head lifted, and without waiting, he darted into the trees. Maria followed, adrenaline surging. The terrain was rough. Mud slicked the ground, branches whipped past her face. But Shadow was locked in, navigating the forest like he was born for it. 20 minutes in, he stopped suddenly. He barked. A single sharp sound. Maria caught up, breathless, and saw him standing beside a small figure curled beneath a fallen log. The boy. Alive, shivering, scared, but alive. Maria dropped to her knees and wrapped him in her jacket, calling it in over the radio with shaking hands. And Shadow? He just sat there beside the boy, not moving, not barking, watching, guarding. Maria looked at him through tears. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "You found him." But Shadow wasn't looking at her. He was staring into the trees, ears up, tail steady. As if he knew. Daniel had seen it too. The story spread faster than anyone expected. By sunrise, local news stations were broadcasting footage of Shadow emerging from the woods beside the rescued boy. The headline flashed across every screen: "Fallen Officer's K9 Saves Missing Child Days After Funeral." Images of the solemn funeral juxtaposed with Shadow's determined face captured the hearts of everyone watching. Maria's phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters called. Animal advocacy groups wanted interviews. Parents sent letters to the precinct thanking Shadow. And yet, as the story caught fire, so did the scrutiny. At the station, Captain Evans pulled Maria aside. "You're getting pressure," he said, rubbing his temples. "Upper brass is worried." "About what?" she asked. "That we're exploiting a grieving dog for publicity," he said bluntly. "Some people think Shadow should be retired, that it's unethical to keep him working so soon." Maria felt her jaw tighten. He's not suffering. He's focused. That mission saved him just as much as it saved that boy. "I agree," Evans said. "But this isn't just about what we see anymore. There are eyes on us. Commanders, politicians, people who don't understand what this partnership means." Maria's heart dropped. "They want to pull him." Evans didn't answer, but he didn't have to. That night, Maria sat on the floor of her garage with Shadow lying beside her. She stroked his thick fur slowly, whispering words more for herself than for him. "You shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone," she said softly. "You already did. Every time you ran into danger, every time you protected Daniel, every time you didn't give up." Shadow shifted his head to her lap, eyes closing gently. The quiet was broken by a knock on the door. It was Daniel's mother, Evelyn. She looked smaller than Maria remembered, or maybe just older, but her voice was steady. "I saw the news," she said, "and I came to say thank you." Maria welcomed her in. They sat together while Shadow rested, the only light in the room coming from a flickering lantern on the workbench. "He's different," Evelyn said, nodding toward Shadow. "Since the funeral, it's like he carries something." Maria nodded. "He's still looking for Daniel, in everything." Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out something wrapped in a handkerchief. She opened it carefully. Daniel's badge. "I want him to wear it," she said. "Not for the world, for Daniel. Because if that dog is still protecting people, it means Daniel is too." Maria blinked away tears. She took the badge and ran her thumb over the number etched in it. That night, she gently clipped it to Shadow's harness. And the next morning, they were called again. A woman had gone missing while hiking in the hills north of Camden. She hadn't returned home. Her car was found, but the terrain was dangerous, and time was critical. Despite the pressure from above, Evans approved the mission quietly. No media, no reporters. Just one woman, one dog, and a race against time. As Maria and Shadow stepped out into the forest trail, everything felt different. Shadow was sharper, more alert. And when Maria gave him the signal, he moved like he'd never stopped working. They pushed through dense brush, climbed steep inclines, and crossed freezing creeks. Hours passed. The sun dipped low. And then, a scent. Shadow froze. He turned sharply and bolted uphill. Maria followed, branches slashing her arms, mud caking her boots. At the bell, he stopped beside a tree and barked. Beneath the brush was the woman, unconscious but breathing, her ankle twisted badly. Maria called it in, hands trembling with relief. And Shadow? He didn't leave her side, even as rescue crews arrived, even when the woman opened her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Later, as Maria watched him from the ambulance's edge, something hit her like a wave. Shadow wasn't just finishing Daniel's work. He was becoming Daniel's legacy. And now, the world would have to decide whether it was ready to honor that. The letter came 2 days later. Maria opened it at her desk, her heart already bracing for what she knew it would say. Official header, precinct seal. Cold legal words. Effective immediately, K9 Shadow is to be retired from active duty. His service is to be honored and preserved, but further participation in field operations is no longer authorized. She read it twice, then let the paper fall onto her desk like it weighed more than a bulletproof vest. Captain Evans came in a moment later, slower than usual, guilt carved into his features. "I fought it," he said quietly. "But they overruled me." Maria didn't speak. Her throat was too tight. "They say it's for his well-being," he added. "They've arranged for a ceremonial discharge next week. Medal of Honor, parade, the works." Maria's eyes snapped up. "He doesn't want a parade. He wants a purpose." Evans nodded. "I know." Outside, Shadow lay on his favorite patch of sun in the courtyard, his eyes half closed, ears flicking at passing birds. He looked peaceful. But Maria knew better. He hadn't responded to commands as sharply since their last mission. He slept more. He was eating, yes, but something in his spirit had dulled. He knew something was coming. That night, Maria walked him through the park they used to patrol with Daniel. The path was familiar. The old brick buildings, the streetlights flickering above. They passed a bus stop where Daniel once broke up a fight, and a playground where Shadow found a missing girl 2 years ago. Shadow paused at every one. Maria whispered, "I think he remembers everything." She wasn't just talking to herself anymore. The next morning, the town held its Canine Hero Ceremony. Children waved little flags. Shadow wore a custom-made medal over his harness. The mayor gave a speech. Flashbulbs popped as they posed for pictures. Maria forced smiles. Shadow sat perfectly still the whole time, but his eyes never once lit up. After the ceremony, Maria was approached by a tall man in a charcoal suit with a crisp badge on his belt. DHS, Department of Homeland Security. His name was Agent Booker. "I've read the reports," he said. "Shadow's performance after Daniel's death is nothing short of exceptional." Maria eyed him warily. "Tell that to the people who just forced him into retirement." Booker leaned in. "I'm not here to applaud. I'm here to offer an alternative." Maria's heart skipped. "What kind of alternative?" "A special program," he said. "One that uses retired K-9s in civilian crisis response, PTSD outreach, missing veterans, even grief counseling. We believe dogs like Shadow can continue to serve, not in danger zones, but in healing zones." Maria stared at him. He continued, "It's voluntary, no more high-risk searches, but he wouldn't be put out to pasture. He'd still work, with you if you're willing." For the first time in days, Maria felt something spark in her chest. "You're saying he'd still be helping people?" Booker nodded. "In a different way, but yes." She turned to Shadow, who was watching her, ears slightly raised, as if waiting for her decision. Later that night, back home, Maria took off his harness and sat beside him, on the floor. She held the badge Evelyn had given her. "We can't go back, boy," she whispered. "But maybe there's another road." Shadow rested his head on her lap, and this time she swore he exhaled like he understood. The next morning, she called Agent Booker and said yes. 2 weeks after enrolling in the civilian K-9 outreach program, Maria and Shadow were sent on their first assignment. It wasn't a high-speed pursuit or life-threatening rescue. It was a visit to a small therapy center just outside Cincinnati. The request had come from a counselor named Dana Cross, who specialized in helping children affected by trauma. Her voice had trembled slightly on the phone. "He's 7, she'd said. "Name's Eli. Lost both parents in a fire 6 months ago. Hasn't spoken since. We've tried everything." Maria glanced at Shadow as they rode in the back of the outreach van. He was alert now, sitting tall, the sun catching the silver in his coat. His badge still hung from his harness. "Let's try something different," she'd replied. The therapy center was warm and welcoming, all pastels and murals, and shelves filled with books. Eli sat on the far side of the playroom when they arrived, small and still, holding a toy fire truck. He didn't look up. Dana greeted Maria with a quiet hug and pointed toward the boy. He hasn't made eye contact with an adult in weeks, but animals, we haven't tried that. Maria unlatched Shadow's leash. The shepherd didn't move at first. Then he stepped forward, slowly, like he knew he was entering sacred space. One paw at a time. No barking, no tail wagging, just quiet presence. Eli didn't react. Shadow got closer, then closer, and finally sat. 3 feet away, facing the boy, silent. Minutes passed. The room felt frozen in time. Then Eli looked up. Not at Maria, not at Dana, at Shadow. Their eyes locked, boy and dog. And something shifted in the room. Not loud, not obvious, but real. Eli's small fingers, still gripping the fire truck, slowly relaxed. His lips parted just slightly, like he'd forgotten how to hold his silence. Shadow didn't peep. He simply waited. The next day, they returned. And the next. On the third visit, Eli crawled forward on the floor and touched Shadow's paw. Maria felt a lump rise in her throat. He lets him get close, Dana whispered. That's new. By the end of the week, Eli was brushing Shadow's coat with gentle hands. Still no words. But now he followed Shadow everywhere, sat beside him for story time, fed him small bites of apple slices. When it was time to leave, he always whispered something, lips moving silently behind Shadow's ear. Maria and Dana exchanged hopeful looks. Something was working. Then came the 6th day. The center held a small pet parade for the children. An afternoon of silly hats and face paint and therapy animals trotting down the main hallway. Shadow was assigned to lead. Maria attached his red therapy vest. Eli, now accustomed to walking beside him, stood quietly at his side, his hand on the dog's back. The other children clapped and laughed as the animals passed. Eli smiled. Then, suddenly, one of the balloons popped. The sound cracked through the hallway like a gunshot. Every child flinched. Eli froze. His body locked, his hands clenched. The smile vanished, and he dropped to the ground, shaking. Maria rushed forward, but Shadow was already there. He moved beside the boy, nudging his arm with his nose, lying down so Eli could feel his fur. Eli didn't respond. Then Shadow did something no one expected. He whimpered. A soft, low, drawn-out whimper. Not of pain, but of empathy. Eli's head turned. Their eyes met. And then, a whisper, barely audible. Shadow. Maria felt her knees weaken. Dana gasped. The boy had spoken. Not a scream, not a cry, a name. The name of the dog who had stayed, who had waited, who had listened. That night, Maria sat outside the center, with Shadow lying at her feet. You did that? She whispered. No training, no command. You just knew. Shadow looked up at her, calm and steady. He didn't need missions anymore. He was the mission. The trees were starting to turn. The once lush green canopy over Camden was shifting into a golden blaze. Orange, amber, rust-colored leaves swirling down from above, like feathers falling from the sky. Autumn had returned, silently, and with it came a strange kind of stillness. Maria knew the signs. It had been almost 2 months since Daniel's funeral. Since that moment when Shadow had laid beside the casket, unmoving, refusing to be pulled away. Since the moment Maria had watched him grieve more deeply than any human she'd ever known. Since then, everything had changed. Shadow had become a different kind of hero. Not one chasing criminals through alleyways or sniffing out danger in airports, but a quiet warrior, working with children, veterans, the grieving, healing without words. And still, something was missing. Maria had felt it in him, in small ways. The way he'd occasionally pause by Daniel's old uniform that still hung in her hallway. The way he sometimes woke from sleep and stared toward the door, as if waiting for a voice that would never come. Or how he would sit by the garage, the place where Daniel used to keep his gear, and let out a sigh so human, it would tighten her chest. Maria didn't need to be told. She knew. Shadow was ready. He needed to go back. That morning, she clipped Daniel's badge back onto Shadow's harness. The very same badge Evelyn, Daniel's mother, had entrusted her with. The one that had survived 3 shootouts, 2 torn vests, and 6 years of service. It had scratches now, and a story behind each one. Shadow stood still as she fastened it, his ears flicking only slightly in response. "You ready, partner?" she asked softly. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't bark. He just met her eyes. And that was enough. The cemetery sat on the edge of town, nestled behind a line of pine trees that always swayed just a little more than the rest of Camden. It was quiet there, not because people feared it, but because it had become a place of reverence, especially after Daniel's funeral. Maria parked the car just outside the gate. She didn't leash him. Shadow jumped out slowly, landing on the gravel with surprising grace. His movements weren't fast or eager. They were steady, purposeful, like a soldier returning to report. Maria followed him without a word, down the gravel path, past rows of markers, past the bronze plaques of other officers, down toward the quiet corner shaded by an old oak tree. And there it was, Daniel's grave. A simple headstone, gray marble. No grand decoration, no statue. Just a name. Officer Daniel A. Reed. He served with honor. The grass around it was neatly trimmed. A folded flag remained encased in glass nearby. Someone had left fresh flowers. And Shadow stopped right in front of it. At first, he just stood there, his body stiff. Then, he sat. Maria kept a few feet behind, watching as the shepherd placed one paw forward, slowly, until it rested right at the base of the stone. And then, gently, he lowered his head onto it, just like the day of the funeral. But this time, there was no confusion in his eyes. No searching. Only stillness. Maria felt something crack inside her chest. This wasn't grief anymore. It was farewell. She knelt beside him, running her hand along his back. "I should have brought you back here sooner," she whispered. "You've carried him all this time. I know it." The wind picked up slightly, rustling the oak leaves above them. For a moment, Maria could have sworn the air shifted around them, warmer, like sunlight breaking through a cloud. "I used to think you were just following orders," she continued. "But I know now. You weren't just Daniel's partner. You were his mirror." Shadow's eyes remained closed. "And maybe," she said, her voice trembling, "you were the part of him that knew how to keep going." Tears welled up and fell, quietly, without effort. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, she removed something Daniel had always worn around his neck under his uniform. A small metal tag, not standard issue. It read, "Protect, Serve, Come Home." She opened Shadow's harness and gently looped the tag through his collar, right beside his K9 emblem and the old scratched badge. "You did all 3, she whispered. Shadow lifted his head slowly. He looked at her, and then, for the first time in what felt like years, he let out a soft breath and laid his head gently in her lap. They stayed like that until the sun began to dip behind the trees, and then he stood, on his own. He looked at the grave one last time. Maria stood too. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Shadow turned and they walked together back up the path, side by side, their steps in perfect rhythm. At the top of the hill, just before they reached the Inger, Maria turned back. "I'll keep him safe," she whispered into the wind. "I promise." Shadow didn't look back. He didn't need to. What needed to be said had already been left at the grave. Not with words, but with a paw print on stone and a silence that spoke of eternal loyalty. And as they disappeared down the road, Daniel Reed's legacy lived on. Not in monuments, but in a dog who never forgot what it meant to love without condition. Winter arrived early in Camden that year. Frost clung to the windows in delicate webs, and even the birds seemed to sing softer, as if mourning something in the cold. But inside Maria's home, there was warmth. Not from a fireplace, but from the steady, comforting presence of Shadow. Now older, slower, but still carrying himself with quiet strength. Since their visit to Daniel's grave, something had shifted in him. He still worked, but his pace had changed. He no longer reacted to everything around him with the precision of a working canine, but rather with the awareness of a soul who had lived too much to rush. His eyes followed Maria with deeper thought. His movements were more deliberate. He was no longer searching for Daniel in every face. He had found peace, but peace didn't mean idleness. One morning, a letter arrived at the precinct addressed to Maria. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. It read, "My father is a Marine veteran. Since my mother passed away last year, he barely speaks. He doesn't leave the house, doesn't eat, doesn't smile. I don't know what else to do, but I saw your story. I saw the dog, and I thought, maybe he could help." Maria folded the letter slowly, then looked at Shadow, who was lying near the heater, head resting on his front paws. His ears perked slightly when she spoke. "You up for one more?" She didn't need to ask twice. The veteran's name was Thomas Delaney. He lived in a small, aging home on the edge of a field just outside of town. The lawn was overgrown. The shutters hung crooked. The porch light flickered even in daylight. Thomas was in his late 60s, with a face that looked like it had seen war and then some. His daughter, Megan, greeted Maria at the door. "He hasn't spoken to me in 3 weeks," she whispered. "But maybe he'll respond to him." She gestured to Shadow. Maria gave a small nod, then unclipped the leash. Shadow walked into the house like he always did. Calm, sure-footed, steady. Thomas was seated in an armchair facing a blank TV. He didn't turn when the door opened. Didn't look when Shadow padded toward him, until the shepherd stopped just inches from his knees. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Shadow sat down and waited. Minutes passed. Thomas's eyes didn't move, but his fingers twitched, just slightly. Shadow leaned forward and placed his paw on the man's boot. That was when it happened. A breath, deep and shaky. Thomas finally looked down and saw Shadow for the first time. His eyes welled up instantly. "Daniel?" he whispered. Maria felt her heart stop. Shadow didn't move, just held the man's gaze. And Thomas began to cry. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It was the kind of cry that came from somewhere far below the surface, a place only someone like Shadow could reach. Maria stepped back and let it happen. No words, no interruption, just healing. Over the following weeks, Shadow returned to the Delaney home regularly. Sometimes Thomas would talk. Other times they would simply sit together. One old man and one loyal shepherd, breathing in sync. Megan called it a miracle, but Maria called it something else. "The last mission," she told Evans one afternoon. "What do you mean?" he asked. Maria glanced at Shadow, who was sleeping peacefully at her feet, his paw still resting over Daniel's badge. "I think he knew," she said softly. That after this, he could rest. Shadow passed away in his sleep on a quiet Sunday morning. Maria found him on the porch, the sun gently warming his coat. He looked like he was dreaming. His breathing had simply, stopped. In his final moments, he had been facing the horizon, the wind gently brushing through the fur between his ears. Maria knelt beside him and placed her hand over his heart. There were no goodbyes, just a thank you, and the echo of years of service that could never be repaid. A week later, Maria stood beside Daniel's grave once more, but this time she held a small urn in her hands. She placed it gently in the soil beneath the oak tree, right beside the headstone, and whispered, "He's home now." Then she stood and walked away, not with sadness, but with reverence. Because heroes like Daniel, like Shadow, never truly leave. They live on in every saved life, every healed heart, and every silent moment where love speaks louder than words.